Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome. I'm Sheila Budoff with Arlington County's 55 Plus program, and I'm delighted to welcome you to today's program. The program is being recorded and will be posted on the 55 Plus YouTube channel at a later point as time permits. Our speaker will be spotlighted so that she's the only one who appears in the recording. In honor of Veterans Day, which is quickly approaching on November 11th, we will pay tribute to the many women who have bravely served in the military in defense of our country. Our speaker today is Lieutenant Colonel retired Marilla Cushman, Senior Advisor to the President of the Military Women's Memorial, which stands at the entrance to Arlington National Cemetery. Lieutenant Colonel Cushman had a distinguished 25-year career with the U.S. Army, spending most of her time as a public affairs officer. She served as Executive Director of the Defense Advisory Committee on Women in the Services. She also worked as Chief of Media Inquiries for the Army, and she culminated her career as Deputy Public Affairs Officer for the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. Following her military service, she has worked for the past 20 years with the Military Women's Memorial, raising awareness of the over 3 million women who have served their country. Lieutenant Colonel Cushman will take questions following her presentation. You're welcome to enter them in the chat as we go along, but we will address them at the end. So please join me in welcoming Lieutenant Colonel Cushman.
Thank you, Sheila, for the great introduction, and thank you for giving us the opportunity, particularly as we approach Veterans Day, to talk about the some 3 million women who've served in our great military, beginning with the American Revolution, actually, and also to tell you about and talk about this memorial that was dedicated in 1997 to honor the service of military women. So I think we'll begin. I'm hoping we can connect here. I'm sort of a neophyte at this, so we'll connect and I can share my screen. So here we go. So thank you again for giving me the opportunity to talk about these great women, these remarkable women, as well as this memorial that tells their story. Here you can this is the facade of the memorial, and I'll tell you a little more about that as we continue. I thought I'd start, however, with a little video that speaks to the meaning of this memorial and what it means to military women. So here we go.
We got off at the metro site, and oh my God, I looked to my left down toward the memorial, and it was just a sea of people. And you couldn't find an empty place all the way down to the Lincoln Memorial.
When I served in the Navy, women were not even allowed to vote.
There were tens upon tens of thousands of people there, all helping to give recognition to the immensity of what this memorial was and will be.
We are here today at Arlington Cemetery before this beautiful memorial on sacred ground to honor and pay tribute to the generations of American women who have served and are serving in our nation's armed forces.
It was so powerful, and there was nothing else to do but cry.
Thank you. America knows what you do and what you have done. Maybe it hasn't always been recognized in the past, but today we proclaim loudly and clearly, we recognize it, we're grateful for it, we say God bless you, and we will always thank you for helping to make our country what it is.
Well, I was sitting on the dais, and one of the things I had planned was for the military to bring the flags of the states and territories down that aisle. I have talked to some of the people who are carrying those flags, and they said it was one of the most unforgettable moments of their life because people were reaching out and touching those flags. It meant so much to them.
I am Captain Linda Bray. I stand for the women who served in Grenada, Panama, and the Gulf War.
It was overwhelming. It was a feeling of pride. It was a feeling of camaraderie to see so many women in one place. And to have them still wearing their hats or maybe their ribbons on their suit.
Because one of the things I had encouraged them to do was if you can't wear your uniform, wear whatever part of it fits. So some of them had on their hat. That's all they had. But they came.
Shortly, the doors of your memorial will be open. Let's go down and cut the ribbon.
There are so many memories of the dedication. And one of them is a quotation from an Army nurse that served in World War II. And to me, it epitomizes what this memorial is about. When she wrote, "Let the generations know that women in uniform also guaranteed our freedom, that our resolve was just as great as the brave men who stood among us. And with victory, our tears fell just as hard." And that's the mission of the memorial, to let the generations know that women in uniform also guaranteed their freedom.
So as General Vaught, our founding president, who just was featured in that video about the memorial and its dedication, which we just celebrated the 26th anniversary of the dedication of this memorial on October 18. So as she said, our mission is to honor and tell the stories of the women, past and present, who've served our nation. And today there are more than 3 million women that we count among us, the legions of military women who've served this nation, beginning with the American Revolution. We're the only historical repository that documents military women's service here in America. And we do that in a variety of ways, both with the exhibits, with videos and programming. And then the very heart of the memorial is what we call the register, where we've asked women to tell us a little bit about what they did, send us their picture, their awards and decorations, where they served, and it all goes into a database, and which is accessible online as well as here at the memorial. And today we have some 310,000 women's records of service, some from the American Revolution to those serving today in the Middle East, in Europe, and here in the United States. So again, we are proud to have that as the mission, and certainly to be able to honor women in this way. We dedicated, as I said, we dedicated the memorial on October 18, 1997, just 26 years ago, a few weeks ago. It was authorized, signed into law by President Reagan in 1986. And we broke ground in 1995. I had a design competition, and with about 120 different organizations, firms competing, and it was awarded to a young architectural firm, a young team, Michael Manfredi and Marion Weiss. Michael's mother was a nurse during World War II, and when she heard about this memorial that they're going to build that's finally going to recognize their service, as the story goes, she reached out and said, Michael, you are going to compete and you're going to win. Because when she got pregnant for Michael, what happened in those days? They put her out of the service. So this was it was supposed to be his payback to her. But indeed, they were the winners of this. So we are a nonprofit agency, a 501c3, and we stand at the very gateway to Arlington National Cemetery. The memorial itself is a memorial and a 33,000 square foot education center. We have a fabulous world-class archive, never before seen artifacts, some 8,000 individual donations, separate donations of artifacts and memorabilia related specifically to the service of military women. Our oral history program, we have about 1,000, some dating back to World War I to the present. And our research library, which we're very proud of and have worked with journalists and historians actually from around the world. We have a journalist here today from Poland, working with our records to tell stories about women's service to the nation. So it's about 1,000 book research library. And so this is the spectacular facade. It was always here. It was dedicated, what you see, this retaining wall, actually, the exterior wall, was dedicated in 1932 by Herbert Hoover. And what it was actually part of the Memorial Bridge project, which was the theme of the Memorial Bridge project was a reunification of the North and the South. And I'm sure you've all seen, as you've come across Memorial Bridge, that line of bricks that goes across the bridge to the Lincoln Memorial, and it also extends all the way up to Memorial Drive, and you can kind of see it at the very base of the reflecting pool there. And that line of bricks is supposed to symbolize this reunification of the North and the South. So dedicated in 1932, never finished. Why? It was the Depression. So I like to think that, some 65 years later, we women came along and gave this place life. And you can see, many of the beautiful architectural features that Marion and Michael incorporated into their vision of what this memorial would be. As I said, the facade was never finished, and you can see there are niches there that look like probably there would be statues or whatever, but we never knew what they were. But what Michael and Marion did is they broke through those niche areas to put in staircases, and that was to symbolize the women breaking through the barriers. The fountain that you see, there was also a place for the fountain, never was one. Now today there's a 200 jet fountain, and it is to represent the sound of individual women's voices that come together and tell the collective story of women's service to the nation in that reflecting pool. On the top, you can see those glass panels, and actually what they are skylights that are shine, obviously let light down into the exhibit gallery itself. And on those skylights are quotations by and about military. And during the day, as the sun passes over, those there are those quotations that are incorporated into those skylights reflect down onto the memorial wall. Initially, the initial design, rather than glass tablets or this skylight, we call it an arc of glass tablets. Rather than that, they had glass spires. And when the winning design was published in the Washington Post, the Commission of Fine Arts, I think it was J. Carter Brown at the time, apparently saw it and nixed the whole project. And Joan of Arc convinced him to accept it with reservation. And why did he nix it? Because this vista that you see up to the Lee Custis Mansion or Arlington House is an historic vista, and those pillars, those skylights, or not, I'm sorry, the pillars that they were going to put in there would obscure that historic vista. So we worked back with the architects, and of course they didn't want to change it because they're artists, but in the end they did. And today they would tell you that it is a more pleasing and fitting design for this memorial. Inside, behind that retaining wall, that beautiful historic wall, is a 220-foot exhibit gallery, which chronicles the history, the collective story and history of women's service to the nation. So I thought I'd tell you a little bit, given that you've seen sort of a sneak peek of what this memorial looks like. I wanted to tell you about the women that it represents. As I said, there's some 3 million women who've served, well, actually more than 3 million women who've served the nation, beginning with the American Revolution. We don't know how many women served during the American Revolution. We do know that many of them followed their husbands or their brothers. They served as laundresses, cooks, doing things that women did then. Some of them, we know the stories of like Margaret Corbin, who stepped up to the cannon when her husband was wounded, and took up the fight. We know of a woman named Deborah Sampson who disguised herself as a man and joined one of the Massachusetts regiments, and she was wounded a couple of times, apparently treated her own wounds, and she ended up with the flu or something, and when the doctor examined her, realized that she was indeed a woman, and of course she was summarily discharged. So again, we don't quite know how many served, but we do know that they did serve, obviously, in a number of capacities. Fast forward to the Civil War, kind of the same thing. Women served, both as nurses in the battlefield, not necessarily organized, although Dorothea Dix did step up, and she kind of started this logistic systems for the medical side of the house and got things organized in that sort of a way. But again, women weren't necessarily in the military, but they served with the military, except those, again, who disguised themselves as men and chose to serve. So along comes the Spanish-American War. The Army decides that it needs some professional nurses, or at least qualified nurses for the day. So they reached out to the Daughters of the American Revolution, who helped them identify some women who were serving as nurses, and they contracted with them to administer aid. Many of them served in Cuba alongside the forces there, and they did so well that the Army decided it needed a permanent corps of nurses. So they created the Army Nurse Corps in 1901, and later the Navy did the same thing in 1908 with a permanent corps of nurses. What they didn't do, however, was to give them rank. And as some of the story goes, the members of Congress didn't want to give women, an opportunity to order men around. So that's why they didn't. I don't know how true that is, but that's the story that goes along with it. So they didn't give them rank. They simply called them nurse. They had no retirement system, no opportunity for promotion. They simply served. And then along comes World War I. So we have these nurses with no rank, but who were in the military. And the Secretary of the Navy, Josephus Daniels, he's sending guys to two fronts, and he's running out of manpower, so to speak, person power. So he turns to his folks and he asks, can we bring women into the military? And the answer was no, because the law said that you had to be a citizen and you also had to be a male. So anyway, this manpower shortage gets worse, and we're getting closer to the war, sending our own more of our own folks. And he turns to his folks again and said, well, what about this new Naval Reserve Act? Is it possible that we could bring women in that way? And sure enough, this new Naval Reserve Act simply said you had to be a citizen, didn't say anything about being a man. And he quickly opened enlistment to women. The very first woman to do so was this sweet little face that you see here, Loretta Perfectus Walsh. She was already working in a recruiting office in Philly, but she is credited with the first woman ever in the history of this nation to raise her right hand and enlist in the military. So in the end, some 12,000 women served in the Navy, 305 in the Marine Corps. And of course, we had many nurses as well. I mean, they were already serving. More than 21,000 were in the Army Nurse Corps, and a little over 1,500 in the Navy Nurse Corps. But the big deal was that they were enlisting women. Women were actually serving in the military, less not counting nurses, obviously. Now you might ask, well, what about the Army? What did they do? Well, the Army didn't really want to have anything to do with having women serving in an enlisted status. But when Pershing in Europe started crying for qualified people to run his communication system, we found that the only ones at the time who were trained on these newfangled telephone machines were women. In fact, many of them were trained right up the road here at Fort Meade. And so he said, well, can we contract with them? And indeed they did. Some 233 of them were contracted with. They did raise their right hand and promised to support and defend. They had uniforms. They were subject to the Code of Military Justice, and off they went to France and served. And Pershing was recorded as saying that they helped end World War I probably 6 months earlier. Now, and what they called these women, these telephone operators, they called them the Hello Girls. They were promised, as I said, veterans benefits. When the war ended, they were simply sent home and fought until 1977 to get the veterans benefits that they so richly deserved. And we're working right now, actually, to with the Congress to get them the Congressional Gold Medal for their service during World War II, or I'm sorry, during World War I. So they call them yeomanettes. The Marines, I guess the public wanted to call the Marine women Marineettes, but the Marine Corps would have nothing to do with that, and they were always women Marines. And we did have a few women in the Coast Guard as well. So they did great. And in fact, it was those women during World War I who really were the tipping point in women getting, then the passage of the 19th Amendment and women getting the vote. Why? Because always before, the argument was that women didn't fulfill the full responsibilities of a citizen, i.e. they didn't serve in the military. Well, no longer could they use that argument. And it was the 19th Amendment was passed and ratified. Oddly enough, not just a few years later, Congress passed legislation that women would not serve in the military. And that's the way it was. They were all sent home, with the exception of nurses who have always been treated differently, practically throughout our history up until close to today. So all the women had gone home except for the nurses. And so what's happening? There's World War II comes along. And again, we're facing this manpower shortage. And so the effort becomes again to pass legislation to bring women into the military. Army again was really reluctant, but in 1942, in May of 1942, legislation was passed to create the Women's Army Auxiliary Corps. Oddly enough, what it called for was to contract with women. And again, they raised their right hand, promised to support and defend, and were indeed sent overseas. Not covered by Geneva Convention because they weren't actually in the military, they were contract. The other services didn't do the same thing, and shortly thereafter, in July or so of 1942, legislation was passed to create the women accepted for voluntary service. Those were the WAVES in the Navy, and along with that, of course, women in the Marine Corps, and again, the Coast Guard. Some 400,000 women served during World War II, 400,000 women. And you all have probably heard the same stories I have about how everybody stepped up and wanted to be part of this war effort. The Army and Navy nurses as well. Well, let me just step back here for a minute. The Army found soon that this WAAC wasn't going to work. One, because they weren't covered by Geneva Convention. They were contract. Actually, they could have gone home anytime they wanted to, just go home. So a year later, in 1943, the WAAC was dissolved, and the Women's Army Corps was established as a separate corps in the United States Army. And again, those women, the WAC served in every theater of the war. And toward the end of the war, the Marine and Navy women were assigned to, as well as the Coast Guard, to Hawaii and some in Alaska, because both of those were territories at the time, and both considered overseas assignments. This picture that you see here of the Lieutenant Colonel Charity Adams Early, it's an extraordinary story of the only predominantly all African American women's unit who were sent overseas, served in England and then later in France. And their job was to clear literally warehouses full of mail that had accumulated and not distributed to soldiers for whatever reason, who knows. And so this was one particular unit that was their job. First, they were reported to England and were supposed to complete the job within 6 months. This Charity Adams Early, she was actually the first African-American woman to join the Women's Army Corps, put together her team and a plan to distribute the mail, and it was done in 3 months. And typical of the Army, they did so well, they gave them another job, sent them to France, and kind of faced the same situation. And as far as the mail that was there. But as I said, a storied unit called they called them the 688 Central Postal Directory Battalion. And actually they have just been awarded the Congressional Gold Medal. And they're waiting right now to fabricate the medal, which will be officially awarded here within, I think, early in 2024. So that was the women of World War II. These women, as I said, they did so well that some of the senior general and flag officers like Marshall and Eisenhower worked with the Congress and some other influential folks to pass legislation to give women a permanent place in the military, rather than sending them all home again and have to in time of crisis have to bring all, to restart recruiting women again. So they wanted a permanent core of military women. While the military really wanted this to happen, Congress wasn't too keen on it and really fought hard to get this legislation passed. We are fortunate to have a representative, and then later Senator Margaret Chase Smith from Maine and Edith North Rogers from Massachusetts, who really worked hard. And finally, this legislation called the Women's Armed Services Integration Act of 1948 was passed on June 12, 1948, which gave women a permanent place in the military. So someone like me could join and expect to have a career. Or, in time of war, we're not going to have to start all over again with trying to figure out how we want to, uniform them, how we want to train them, where they can serve, so on and so forth. There's a ready corps. But that legislation, while it gave us a foot in the door and was, kind of a crack in the glass ceiling, so to speak, it also had some very pretty serious restrictions. One, women couldn't serve above the highest grade a woman could serve was a lieutenant colonel or commander, so 05. She would not serve aboard combat ships or combat aircraft. If she married, her husband would not receive an ID card. Therefore, she was considered a single person, so she didn't get quarters. She didn't get a quarters allowance, nor did she could her husband, as I said, get an ID card to use the commissary, the PX, have medical benefits. So there were some really very serious restrictions, on and off again. And if you became pregnant, they put you out like immediately. So it was some really, really serious restrictions that many were in place for like almost 70 years. And we'll talk a little bit about that in just a few minutes about how those things fell away. But that's the way it was. Women had like I said, they had a place in the military, and would be able to serve. And so it didn't take long after World War II for the Korean War to come along. And in fact, it was the first time and only time, or the first time, forgive me, that we recalled women actually to active duty to serve. It was the war itself was primarily a nurses' war. Army women served on the ground. Of course, we had Navy women on ships, and the Air Force Nurse Corps had been created by this time, and so we had flight nurses both in the Navy and the in the Navy and the Air Force. It was a horrendous war. The women that I've talked to would talk about setting up a hospital. Imagine setting up a hospital and the threat of being overrun, and they'd have to break down and move again. It's horrible conditions. One of the women who very generously gave us her diary, she talked about having to set up a hospital in an abandoned schoolhouse. And it was incredibly hot, apparently, but they had to close the windows because rats climbed up the outside. And then the next morning they had to break down and move again. So it was a horrendous war. And I think about those young women who probably were just graduates, many of them from their nursing schools, and finding themselves on a hospital ship or on the ground in Korea. And we certainly owe them a great debt of gratitude for the service that they gave. And next comes the Vietnam War. Some 7,500 women, military women, served in Vietnam, and by far most of them were nurses. What broke the logjam to get other than nurses assigned to Vietnam? Apparently General Westmoreland wanted a WAC to come over and work with the Vietnamese army to create a Vietnamese Women's Army Corps. But also he wanted some secretaries. It's what women do. Send me some secretaries. So that sort of broke the logjam for women to serve in Vietnam and in that theater of operation. As I said, some 7,500 served, but it was really the Vietnam War that was kind of was a game changer for military women. It was at the time was America's longest war, and the draft was dragging on, and the American public was particularly tired of the draft, and as also the women's movement was gaining strength, and kind of all of that came together like the perfect storm. I guess we could call it the perfect storm, which convinced the military that they really needed to bring more. They needed more manpower, and that manpower was going to be woman power. So they dropped the requirement, because until then women could only be 2% of the force. So they had to get rid of that. And if they're going to get rid of this cap on the number of women who could serve, they also had to get rid of the cap on the grade at which women could serve, because why would you want to come in and you couldn't, try to achieve the highest levels possible? So they dropped also that requirement for women to cap on their grade restrictions to lieutenant colonel and commander. And the very first women to achieve general officer rank was in 1970. General Anna Mae Hayes, she was an Arlington resident here for quite some time. General Anna Mae Hayes was the very first woman in the history of the United States to put on a military star, and she was quickly followed during the same ceremony by Elizabeth Hoisington. Also, she was the director of the WAC, also lived here. I don't know if she was an Arlington resident, but certainly here in Fairfax County. So they were the first two women ever to serve as general officers, the Army Nurse Corps and the Women's Army Corps. And then, so women are beginning to get in leadership positions, and they're serving and filling critical jobs, and what comes along but Desert Storm. And while we had some conflicts, minor conflicts in between then, but comes Desert Storm, and we ended up deploying some 40,000 women to Kuwait and Saudi Arabia to be part of this operation. And we lost some 9, I believe, to these wars. We had 2 women who were taken prisoner of war, held just for a short number of days. And so again, we find that women are in leadership positions, and we need woman power to be able to prosecute this war. And so women were moving into a number of different positions that we had never had seen them before. And you can see here, we have a Coast Guard woman who indeed deployed to that theater of operation as well. And we had, by this time, we also had women flying utility aircraft. After World War II, and until the early 70s, even though we had the women Air Force service pilots fly some 70 million miles back and forth across the United States during World War II, we closed all aircraft to women following World War II. And so, as I said, in the early 70s, again, we needed manpower, and that manpower was women power. So they were flying utility aircraft, and so one of those utility aircraft was a refueler, and and so here they are over in the desert refueling combat aircraft, and were certainly just as much of a target as the fighter aircraft. So after this war, those women who were flying those combat aircraft came back, marched themselves up to the Hill, and in 1991, that restriction from that 1948 act that prohibited women from serving aboard combat ships and combat aircraft, that provision of the aircraft fell away. And in 1993, that provision that prohibited women from serving aboard combat ships fell away. And so you might recall that when Captain Phillips of the Maersk was captured by Somali pirates and was rescued by the United States Navy, who was filling that position as the battle group commander, but Admiral Michelle Howard, who had was leading that battle group. So, as I said, women quickly moved into leadership positions and were doing just a little bit of everything. And then we come to this global war on terror. Women, again, as I said, were flying. We're now flying combat aircraft. This happens to be Bernice Armour. She was a Marine Corps pilot, Black Hawk pilot, combat, and so you saw, hundreds of women doing the very same thing as that. And again, it was because of need. The nation needed manpower, and we turned to woman power to fill those jobs. And since then, we've continued to employ women in all kinds of different positions. They are now in all the combat arms, and in fact, in 2013, the Secretary of Defense, realizing that what we were doing was attaching women to combat units because they were prohibited from being assigned by law to combat units, we were attaching them, kind of working around. And the Secretary of Defense called for an end of that, and to be able to use women as we needed them and their talents as well. This happens to be Shannon Kent, an extraordinary young woman, a senior chief petty officer. She was an intelligence specialist, and was in Syria, actually, and was in an urban environment in Syria, and was killed by a suicide bomber. She was only 35 years old, a mother of two. But it's women like Shannon Kent who we certainly revere and certainly honor her service. Today, we've had some 177 women who've lost their lives in these wars, in these global war on terror, and nearly 1,200 women who are recipients of the Purple Heart. So they're standing up and doing their part for sure. And then, there was this restriction, the very first women who were promoted to general officer in 1970, and today, you see women like General Laura Richardson, who's a 4-star general, who is now also a combatant commander, who is eligible to be the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, actually, because she is a combatant commander. So women are doing great things there throughout our military. And you saw just 2 days ago or Friday, I think it was, the Congress finally confirmed the appointment of Admiral Franchetti to be the Chief of Naval Operations. Unheard of until just a few years, but certainly when the nation needed women, they stepped up and they proved their worth. So again, our job here at the memorial is to lift the service of those women that you just were introduced to. So we do that in a number of ways. We through this register, we showcase them wherever we can, with programming, videos, tours, things of that sort. And what we seek to do is certainly to educate the American public, and to empower the young women of today to step up and continue this extraordinary legacy. I talked about the register. It's a database that houses and preserves the stories of women who have registered their service with us. And again, what does that mean? We ask them to send us a picture, tell us a little bit about they did, their awards and decorations, and it all goes into this database. So when it can be accessed online, but what is the wonderful point of it is that when you come to Arlington and visit the memorial, you can call that registration up on the big screen, and pay tribute and honor the woman in that way. And it becomes a very poignant place in the memorial when we have families coming from across the United States, kids on school trips who come in, and his or her sister may be serving, and we can bring her picture up on the big screen and show that we honor women in a major national memorial. And you can imagine how proud that kid is as well. It's also a great place to honor and remember women who they're having a memorial service here at Arlington Cemetery, and it's a place to come and pay tribute to her as well. As I said, we have an oral history program with some 1,000 oral histories. We also tell this story with the various exhibits and displays in this 220-foot exhibit gallery. We have a number of programs. We're in the middle right now of a series we call Women, Peace, and Security, that speaks to women's service in a variety of ways around the world and what that brings to any conflict, and how it and kind of an added bonus to any situation. We have lesson plans that are exportable and we send out to classrooms. And we also have traveling exhibits. Right now we have one called The Color of Freedom that's in Arkansas, that speaks to the history of diversity in the military, and particularly related to women's service. That began, again, the diversity began certainly in the American Revolution with Native American women who served with the military. the Civil War with Harriet Tubman, and women throughout. And again, we have a world-class archive of some 8,000 separate donations that range from wedding dresses that were made from parachutes, to diaries, to gas masks, to all kinds of different things that relate to women's service. And the memorial is also a place to remember the women who served, where we would preserve their stories, and give the American public the opportunity to come and see and learn about the extraordinary things that American women have done for the nation and their contributions. We are currently in the midst of a national registration campaign. As I said, we have some 310,000 women's records of service, which is substantial. But when you consider that we've had some 3 million women who've served, it's only about 10%. And so the story is only 10% complete. So every story makes a difference. And we firmly believe that our story will never be complete until every woman's story is recorded. So you all can help us with that. So if you know of a woman, or you're a woman who has served, or as I said, of a woman past or present, make sure that she takes her rightful place in history by registering her service at the memorial. Our stories are very important. Today, only about 1% of our population serves in our military. So a lot of us don't know much about our military, because it wasn't like during the days of the draft when the next door neighbor, practically everybody served, right? And we knew somebody who served, but today that's not the case at all. So certainly our military in many ways is separated from the general population. And when you think that only about 15% of that 1% are women, that story is pretty dim, actually. So again, our effort is to find and register these service women, or these women who've served, so that we can certainly tell their story, and complete their story of service. It's easy to do. You can go online. Oh, I'm going to go back here just for a sec. Pardon me. It's easy to do. You can go to our website, womensmemorial.org, click on create an account, which lets you kind of into the system, so you can peruse who is registered and what their stories say. And it also gives you the opportunity to register a woman who served. So I encourage you to do that. That's kind of my charge to you, giving you a job to help tell the story of women's service, and to collect their remarkable stories and their contributions, because military women's story is actually our story, all women's story, and it's also certainly a part of our nation's history and our military history, and we certainly want that to be complete. So help us do that. So again, here we are at the gateway to Arlington National Cemetery, this beautiful historic facade, and behind it is that treasured gallery that speaks to the service of military women. So I'm going to close with another quick video that kind of, you saw where we started, and I want to show you where we are today.
From America's beginning, women have answered the call to serve. Our stories of triumph and sacrifice are vital to our country's history. We serve in every branch of the military, at every level, as warriors, innovators, and leaders. The Military Women's Memorial is the only national memorial dedicated to the lives of American servicewomen. For more than 20 years, our world-class education center has brought the nation together to honor their courage, determination, and love of country. The Military Women's Memorial will bring these stories to life for a new generation. Help us honor her service.
So thank you again for letting me join you in this kind of pre-Veterans Day program. I do want to tell you that since the birth of the nation, certainly to today's modern military, women have always stepped forward whenever the country needed them. They were always ready to serve, even when service meant sacrifice. Assignments and promotions were limited, benefits weren't equal, and those with whom they served didn't want them, and even when they couldn't vote. In the face of it all, women just wanted to serve. So again, thank you for having me join you today and for letting me bend your ear about these remarkable women, these remarkable 3 million women who were and are still called today to serve. But before I close, I wanted us to remember that Saturday is Veterans Day, the day we honor the men and women who've served this nation. And today, some 19 million heroes walk among us and proudly wear the title veteran. Thinking about them brings to mind those provocative words inscribed for the ages on the walls of the Korean War Veterans Memorial that's not too far from us here at the Women's Memorial. They read, "Our nation honors her sons and daughters who answered the call to defend a country they never knew and a people they never met." That is certainly selfless service. So on this Veterans Day, this Saturday, and every day, please remember we owe our service members a tremendous debt of gratitude for protecting our freedoms. And their service to our country didn't stop simply because they hung up their military uniform for the last time. They knew their mission was far from over. They sharing untold talent, skill, and experience. Veterans continue to serve their communities, supporting charities and volunteer activities, and serving at every level of the government, because that's what they know, and that's what they do. They do to serve. And we do indeed owe them a debt of gratitude. 2 years ago, I love to tell this story. America lost an extraordinary patriot, a veteran, a lifelong servant of the nation, General Colin Powell. At his memorial service, his son Michael, in eulogizing his dad, called him a great lion with a big heart, and went on to speak about holding his father's hand during their final minutes together. Michael spoke then about reflecting on the many things that hand had done during that extraordinary life of service. From squeezing his hand when he was a child, to signing report cards and fixing cars, to saluting soldiers, signing treaties and war orders. General Colin Powell was the consummate veteran, and he lived a life of service. So today, or on November 11, or any day that you shake a veteran's hand, I hope you will pause to reflect on the words of Michael Powell and think about the countless acts of service that hand that you hold has done for you and this great nation of ours. And yes, for people they never met. So thank you for giving me the honor of telling you a little bit about America's military and the Military Women's Memorial. And happy Veterans Day.
Thank you so much, Lieutenant Colonel Cushman. This was fascinating and very moving, and we really appreciate your honoring us with your talk. Thank you, heartfelt thanks from us to you for your many years of service to our country. We appreciate that. And thank you for your many years of service to honor other women who have served our country. We appreciate it. This memorial is a wonderful tribute to them. Thank you.
Well, I have to tell you, Sheila, I loved being in the Army, and I certainly have loved being here at the Military Women's Memorial. You know, it's quite a treat when you get to be able to reflect on what you did as a career, and then help to tell the story of so many women. It really has been it's been a delight, actually, to be able to do that, and certainly an honor. Are any of our guests today, are any of you women veterans?
And please feel free to unmute yourselves and say you are, or raise your hand in the Zoom function to let us know.
And if you're not, I would like to invite you, if you gather groups together, I'd love to have you come and give you a personal tour of this extraordinary place. Just give me a yell, and I am there for you for sure.
It just so happens we have a 55+ travel program, and I'm the travel assistant. So I am going to share that with my supervisor, Sharlika Ashton, and let her know, because one of my questions was going to be, do you have guided tours of the memorial? So
absolutely. And I love doing it, because it certainly brings all of that alive. When you get to see the artifacts and go into the register and pull up some of those extraordinary stories of service. Every day, I think I learned something new that a woman has done that I never was aware of. And funny stories as well. I'll tell you a funny story. So our founding president, General Wilma Vaught, she's a legend, certainly among military women, and pretty well known here in the area. She retired and has lived here for many years. But so General Vaught is a Vietnam veteran. Okay, she was one of those few women who weren't nurses who decided to go. And so when she came down on orders to go to Vietnam, she turned to her folks and said, well, none of us women, we are non-combatants. None of us have weapons training. Are you going to give me weapons training? I am going to, a combat environment. And they said no. Thank you. They said no. We don't give weapons training. So anyway, she convinced her brother-in-law to train her on a handgun and a rifle. And then she convinced somebody to take her to the firing range so that she could qualify on weapons, in a valid sort of a way. And she did. She qualified marksman, expert marksmanship. So she gets herself to Vietnam, reports to the arms room and says, can I get my issued weapon? And they said, oh no, you're a woman. You're not going to get a weapon. You're a non-combatant, which she thought was quite odd, since she's in a combat zone. And thought at least she should be able to protect herself. So anyway, she goes to her billets, and she's replacing an Army warrant officer woman who had been there during the Tet Offensive. And that was a horrible, oh my gosh, overrun by the Viet Cong. And somehow that woman had acquired an AK-47 ammunition, And she opened up her bureau drawer, and in that bureau drawer was the AK-47 and munitions that General Vought acquired. So, but for her year in Vietnam, she never used the AK-47, didn't have to, and returned after her year to America to continue her story and her service. So, I mean, all kinds of crazy little things like that, you know, the workarounds that women did to do the right thing. Yeah, it's been a journey for sure.
So we have gone a little over, but I do want to see, maybe we'll make time for one question if anybody has a question. Going once, twice. Okay, I guess no questions. Okay. Thank you all for joining us. I guess you have them spellbound.
Well,
Speechless.
Please take me up on the offer. I would love to give you a tour, as I said, and introduce you to some of these women, and certainly their cherished stories and artifacts. Thank you.
Thank you. That would be fantastic. We appreciate it. Thank you for joining us, and thank you to all our participants as well for joining us. We appreciate it. Everybody enjoy. Happy Veterans Day. We have a comment in the chat. Thank you for your wonderful presentation. I have learned so much.
Oh, bless your heart. Thank you.
Thank you very, very much. Everybody take care and be well.